I'll call the Powhatan County Joint Board of Supervisors and School Board Special Meeting for February 17th to order. Let the record show that all Board of Supervisors are present.
And the Powhatan County School Board joint meeting, all members are present except Ms. Ayers.
At this time, we'll have our invocation and our pledge. Mr. Tucker, will you lead us in the invocation? Mr. Kennedy will lead us in the pledge.
Give us this evening the guidance and the patience to do the people's business. Help us listen to each other without preformed opinions. And let us do what we need to do to build this school and the other facilities for the school system. Thank you.
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Any request to postpone or change or add anything to the agenda as presented tonight? I do have one request. I'd like to add county administrative comments after item A, so that would become item 9, and then item 9 will become 10, and item 10 will become 11. I'd like that in a form of motion.
So moved to approve the agenda as amended, Mr. Chairman.
All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Those opposed? Let us show the motion passed 5-0. You need to present? Okay. At this time, we'll have a first public comment period. Anyone wishing to speak, please come forward at this time. Seeing none, I'll close the first public comment period. We'll move on to item 7A, funding CIP and board bond process. Davenport, McGuire, Woods presenting.
I will start this off, and first we want to let you know that McGuire Words will not be here today, but they did draft for us a resolution, which a copy of that draft is in front of you on the dais. It's a single sheet of paper. It says a resolution approving the initial plan of finance, et cetera, et cetera. And Mr. David Rose is here from Davenport, and he'll be able to answer questions on that resolution. If you have that, we'll go over the terms of that. To start off, I'll go through a real brief summary of where we were last year and where we are right now. And then at that point, David Rose from Davenport and I and Charla and March are here to answer any questions that you may have on any of the projects or on the funding. So you have in front of you the PowerPoint presentation. It is not going to be up on the slide, but I wanted to point out we started out in 2016 with we didn't start out in 2016 with $51.9 million of bonds. It was after the Board of Supervisors and the school board met many times in 2016 that the two boards narrowed it down to 5 projects for a total of $51.9 million of bonds. And during that process, you also looked at several different funding options, and on slide number 3, it looks at some of the funding sources that you had for those funding options, which is to use the annual reduction in debt service, to use the savings from closing the middle school, use some of the increase in sales tax and personal property revenues, or use half of the increase in those revenues, use increases from a real estate tax rate increase, and at that time 1 cent was $293,000, and also potentially use 1% of the increase in the real estate assessment as of January 1, 2016. So the next slide, which is slide 4, shows you the 8 options that the board and the school board discussed last year, and you focused in on option B, which did fund the $51.9 million worth of bonds. It did use the increase in revenues. It did not increase real estate tax, except that it did use 1% increase in the real estate assessment as of January 16th, which does equate now to approximately 1 cent on the tax rate. So I'm on slide 5, and at the board direction to county and school staff, the board's direction in June of 2015 is to have the design or the start of the design done for the 5 projects that are listed there, and bring back in January the cost estimates for those 5 projects. So staff did that, and if you look on page 6, We've done that, and in addition to that, identified three additional projects to add to that. So the bond amount is now $62.6 million. We've added the public safety communication system more than doubled in price. The Sally Port is still at the original estimate. The computer-aided dispatch was added, and field improvements at the junior high school were added. The joint facility, the price of that actually, the cost of that, estimated cost, actually went down. The junior high school is coming in as planned, but there is now a water tower that is needed at the junior high and at the joint vehicle facility. And the mechanical repairs at the Powhatan Elementary School are as budgeted. So the subtotal of the Powhatan County Public School projects are actually very close to what they were last year, but the county projects have increased substantially. We're looking at $62.6 million of bonds, and there was some questions about how that number related to the $66.5 million that Davenport was using. And Davenport reported on page 13 a total of 66.5, which is 66,488. There were no subtotals on Davenport. So Davenport has both the bonds on 13 and the leases. So we put a subtotal so you could see how the $66.5 million that Davenport is using ties in with the bond project. So the last slide is just a reminder that there is a public hearing on Monday, February 22nd at 7 p.m. I had a question about that because the meeting does start at 6 p.m., but the public hearing starts at 7 p.m., and it will start at 7 p.m. It is a time-certain item. And at that meeting, we have before you for adoption the resolution that is before you on the dais. And the resolution, I wasn't going to read the resolution, but what you're authorizing, or you're approving the proposed CIP, which is a preliminary CIP, with the understanding that a final list of approved projects will be adopted as part of our budgetary process, and that you're directing the county administrator and other staff to work with the financial advisor and bond counsel on financing those projects, and that number 3 says they're authorized to take any action that they might need. So I just briefly read to you, I didn't actually read it, I briefly summarized items number 1, 2, and 3 that are in this resolution. So with that, as I said, I'd like to introduce Mr. David Rose. He's here to answer any questions. I know that all of you did receive last week the financial analysis, capital funding analysis that they went through, and we have had 3 meetings now where we have covered for you all of the projects which you ask us to begin the design on, and we have handed packages out. We didn't re-hand out anything, we just hoped you would bring whatever information that you needed. So, again, any of us stand ready to answer any questions.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I'm sorry, couldn't hear.
I said yes.
Oh, okay. Pat, we had talked last meeting, I believe, about capitalizing the first 2 years of payments and around $3 million. Is that in here?
I'm going to let Mr. David Rose answer that question, and I'll draw your attention to the page that you will see that on, unless Mr. Rose beats me to it.
Okay. I think you are talking about D, scenario D is what, so I would basically move you to that page or those pages and see if I can answer any of the questions that you have.
And D, the scenarios are found summarized on page 19.
Exactly.
And it is on page 18 that it does tell you that scenario D does have the capitalized interest.
Exactly.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
could we, excuse me, Mr. Norwood, I think you were queued up.
No, go ahead. And I do have a question after you. Go ahead, sir.
Could we ask the county administrator and 3 sentences or less to tell us what that means for the audience, the capitalization?
I think it would be better if Mr. David Rose explained that to the audience. He's much more capable of that than I.
I hope I am. We'll try, but no, thank you.
I'm sorry,
no.
sir. This is before you came up here, Mr. Chairman. I do have a
Yeah.
question for Ms. Weiler. And I just want to be clear, number 2 on the resolution says that the board basically directs yourself and the county staff to work on the financing with the understanding that no financing will be incurred on behalf of the county without an authorization from the board. In other words, what this is saying is you can start working on it, but you can't pull the trigger on actually releasing money, et cetera, correct?
Yeah. Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Nordvig, for pointing that out. I should have mentioned that.
No,
We cannot issue bonds. It would require, we'd come before you for a public hearing on the bonds, and we would then, you would have to adopt a resolution authorizing the bonds. And this definitely is not a bond authorization resolution. It's just we're committing to the projects. Go ahead and get started.
Got it. I just want to be very, very clear on that, so
Okay.
we weren't spending money that we didn't know we were spending. Okay, sorry, sir, thank you.
No, my pleasure. Again, appreciate the opportunity. You may recall, for the board members, my younger partner, Kyle Laux, was here last time, could not make it tonight, and Griffin Moore, who's been doing all the heavy lifting for both of us, is here. So he'll make sure if I say anything wrong to correct me and kick me, and I've been kicked a lot of times, so I'll try to answer your question, though. If you go to page 41, I think that would probably be helpful.
Of the analysis.
Of the analysis, yes. I'm sorry, I'm stuck. Yeah, go to page 41. You'll notice there where it says project amount is the very bottom, and then you'll see principal amount next to it. Do you see that, everyone, on page 41?
Yep.
If you go to the very bottom where it says 5-year CIP total, you'll notice it's about 66.5 million of projects. And then to the right of that, you'll see it says principal 70.5 million. What that includes is roughly the $3 million of the capitalized interest. And so I believe you had asked me if I would tell everyone what capitalized interest is. That is money that you could potentially borrow upfront in the bond issue that effectively pays the interest during the time that a school is being built. So before you really get the usage of that facility, you don't actually start to pay interest or principal on it. You borrow the interest. Now, the point is that adds to the overall cost of the bond issue because, again, you're adding about $3 million, which is essentially taking you roughly about $1.5 million for each year to, again, cover. So before the county then starts to have payments, which would be essentially the third year, roughly, if you have 2 years of capitalized interest, that's how that works. Think of it, if you would, as if you have a home and you want to build a home, and the home is, let's say, $100,000, and your principal, your payments, you start your principal once the home is built, but you also say, because you're living, let's say, in a rental for the next 2 years, rather than, in effect, paying interest on the home that you have and paying on the rental, you say, I'm going to borrow enough for the next year. Let's say if it takes a year to build the house, I'm going to borrow enough so that, again, I don't have to make 2 different payments. And that's essentially what capitalized interest is. So we wanted to show that to you. Hopefully
Mr.
that's
Chairman?
the answer.
Sir, I have a question.
Yes.
Can you comment on the effect of rising interest rates over, let's say, the next
Very smart, very, very long yesterday, having turned back. But here's all I know. I've been doing this now for 35 years. Rates are as low, essentially, as we've seen them in all those years. The Federal Reserve, as you know, in December, started to talk about and actually implemented a rate increase, a modest one. So they want to see rates go up. Yet, ironically, except for the very short term, meaning I really don't know, other than to recognize that the Federal Reserve wants to see it go up generally. We are at such historic lows that I don't think you'd be hard-pressed to be criticized if you went forward in this environment because rates are so low. But that doesn't mean that they couldn't be a little bit lower a year from now, or they could be materially higher a year from now. We just don't know. What I will tell you, and Griffin, you correct me, what we did with our analysis is purposely put in a higher interest rate than we are today. So we've added to the interest rates as if they went up a fair amount, well over 1%. Actually, rates would have to go up about, 1.5% to 2%, to be where we have shown you the analysis that we've done, just in case.
Thank you.
Mr. Norwood, were you going to follow up on that?
No, I wasn't, but since you gave me a sliver, I will say that I used to live in Bermuda, and if you figure it out, I'm there. I'm right there with you.
So, Mr. Rhodes, in the draft resolution that we have in front of us in paragraph B, it mentions approximately 67 million.
Right.
That would, if we chose to do this, we would have to change that number, is that correct?
We could change that. I think this is the spirit of the resolution, because if you look at this, it probably would be prudent to change it. I would think so. Yes, Mr. Tucker?
For the public, which is jaundiced anyway, and I understand, and we all are, it would be better to say what we mean up front rather than change it later, which sounds like a bait and switch to some people. Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Williams.
I'm just going to follow up on the gentleman's comments about predicting interest rates going forward. It was interesting noting the chairman's comments, this most recently, that she wouldn't actually rule out negative interest rates, something that 5 other countries have done. And as you know, inflation's under 2%, and the one thing the Fed has been trying to do is create inflation, and has been not very successful, as you know. So
Well, and I think the point is this. Let's assume that we get to what I think is hard to me. I was not an economist, but hard to me imagine negative interest rates in the United States, but it's certainly possible. Like you said, there's more talk of that. And just for those of you maybe not aware, what they mean by negative interest rates is just yesterday or the day before, I think it was Sweden, if I'm not mistaken, was the last country that said if you put your money into their bank, you would actually, if you put $100 into the bank, after 1 year, you'd have basically $98.50 for safekeeping. You're actually paying the bank versus the bank paying you. So the point is this. I don't have any sense, I must admit, I don't think our bond tables have ever gone to negative. But what I would say is this. Let's assume that you decide to move forward in the next few weeks, months, what have you, and we borrow, and the all-in cost of money, just go with me for a minute, is 4%. If rates continue to come down, we will set up that bond issue such that there will be more than likely a call provision, an ability for us to call in the bonds. It's typically a 10-year lockout. So whatever interest rates are for the next 10 years, anyone that owns a bond for the first 10 years, and we're talking here about 20, 25-year bonds basically for the school piece, for the bigger pieces, what would happen then is we would most likely try to refinance them. No guarantee. We try to refinance them, as we've done with you before, as rates come down, and try to just lower the interest rate. And so that will not be something that we're going to lose an opportunity. I should say we'll keep that opportunity. And so if they do come down, it won't be perfect, won't be able to be something you could do immediately without some penalty, but big picture, we have that ability.
Any other questions?
So, Mr. Chairman, if I'm reading this draft resolution right, it focuses around C and 1. We're authorizing the county administrator and staff and the advisors and bond counsel, et cetera, to go forward with crafting number 1 for our consideration at a later time. So we're just asking to authorize the county administrator, bond, staff, et cetera, to proceed with the construct. We're not signing off yet. It's important to Mr. Norwood's point, that we're not saying spend it, we're saying continue the process of telling us how to do this, how much it's gonna cost, et cetera. That's a long question. The answer, yes or no?
The answer is yes.
Yes.
And, Mr. Chairman, if I may
Yes.
kick in, and is it not true by law that this is a plan? In fact, the entire budget is a plan, and it does not commit anybody to actually appropriate money. It's just
The entire CIP, not the budget. The budget you do appropriate, but this
well, I know you
CIP
do,
is a plan.
Plan.
So it's not an authorization to spend.
right?
So if we were to work through the CIP and it came in at 56 million, all we're saying is that approximately does not bind us to 67 million in projects that could come in if we roll our sleeves up and decide to move some things out. It still doesn't bind us until,
Exactly. Yes, sir. That's right. Think of this as a hunting license. You may not go out hunting tomorrow, but you've got a license to do that, and effectively from that perspective.
and that 67 million will take, to do that, we would have to change our financial policy, if that was correct, to say 15% versus the 12% we currently have.
We would, and one of the things I think Kyle may have talked to y'all about earlier is it has been a number of years since we've reviewed financial policies, and we've been talking to staff about sort of revising those for several reasons, one of which is with some of the new GASB, which is some of the auditing accounting principles and standards and all, we think we need to add to them for anybody, not just Powhatan. So we're going to recommend that, and it's up to the county administrator, but simultaneous with some of the things we do this spring, having some revised policies is going to be a recommendation.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Chairman, what's the downside of moving this from 12 to 15? What's the downside?
I think the downside is really very limited. I think it just tells you that, you know, you've set a bar, recognizing that you've got a sort of a generational projects to do, and you need to do that. If we ultimately, which our goal is to eventually get to AAA, it makes it a little bit more difficult. I mean, again, but I will tell you, you know, I look about coming through here, and I came through Chesterfield, where we're financial advisors to. I can remember when Chesterfield had their policy at 10%, and they had a very large school program, and they knowingly had to broach that policy for about 3 years running. So they were over 12%. Now they're back down under that 10%. So I think, again, Mr. Tucker, we want to set up policies. We think 15% is in the prudent range, given that you are a growing and a young county from that perspective. And I just think that the downside is it makes it a little harder eventually to get to AAA. But again, you are very highly rated, and I just think that really there's no real downside from our perspective.
It was interesting, Mr. Norwood and I attended a day-and-a-half training class through VACO this weekend, and some of the other localities were there. And one of them that reported to us had a 15% policy. However, for the large project they had captured, they're now at 18%. And their goal is to get below the 15%. There was another locality who had a 15% policy, and they were a little over 15%. They had a 12% policy at one point, and they had to take on some bigger projects, and they amended their policy to say 15%. So, you know, it was interesting to listen to some other counties who were facing similar things that we were facing as a county. Not to say that's right or wrong, just was, you know, kind of asking some questions as we had some peers around us, so it was interesting.
So, may I?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yes, Ms. Williams, or,
Go ahead, Ms.
go ahead, Ms.
Williams.
Williams.
This question came up, I raised this question last meeting, about using capital expenditures in your expense ratio for your debt. Now, the auditor doesn't do that. I asked the question, should localities do that in the calculation of their fiscal policies? What say you?
I'm not sure I follow, Mr. Williams. Give me, help me a little bit understand what you mean. Maybe you do.
The GFOA has a table in the back of the CAFR, and in that table, you it calculates debt service to expenditures in a different manner than what the bond rating agency does, in the different manner than, of course, that we use in our policy. And they include more capital in it than what we do in our calculation. And that's the difference in the two calculations. Now, I'm not sure what Mr. Williams' question is related to that, but I just wanted to explain to you where we were talking about it, and,
I think what we try to do, Mr. Williams, is do something, since the rating agencies are the ones that are giving us an actual rating, and all of your colleagues out there, I think that's really the standard to which we try to look at our policies. It doesn't make it right or wrong, but if they're going to give us the rating, we want to do what they see and what they expect. And so that's sort of how we try to provide it, because they do a lot of peer, like you said, Mr. Milton, they do a lot of peer comparatives. And so we want to be able to be in sync with the peer comparatives for them. That's sort of how we think about it.
I noticed on page 21, the analysis, you have a footnote. And footnote number 2 says FY 2019 expenditures are based on FY 2016 budget expenditures net of capital projects funds and schools SRP funds equal to 73, and assumes a 2% annual growth. So I'm assuming that by this footnote that you did exclude capital expenditures.
I think we did, yes, we did. That's exactly right. Yes, sir.
Going back to Mr. Tucker's question a few minutes ago.
Yeah.
When you look at the AA2 median in the charts that you provide us, it's, the expense ratio, I believe, is like 7.9 for the median. We're at 10.9 now, and we're projected to go to, I believe it's 14.6% 2019. Given that, you know, we are.
And if everybody's been, just page 9, I think, just maybe I'll tell everybody else.
Thank you.
Sorry. Yep.
It seems like that we're way in front, way ahead of our peers for our expense ratio. And if you go back and you look at the second criteria that we use, debt versus assessed value, we're currently at 2.3%. The median for AA2 is 1.8%. And if we went forward with scenario D, we would go to 3.9%, which is actually more than double the median for our bond group. Does that cause any concern on your part?
Let me answer the first part, and I think you've asked some good questions there. If you go to page 9, debt service versus expenditures, which I think really is where the rubber meets the road, because that's your credit card. That's what we look at. That's how I call it. You know, how many pennies on the dollar of your budget are going to debt service or would be? You know, what you look at here, look at someone like Stafford County, Montgomery County, but particularly someone like Stafford or Warren, both of which we know well. You know, you're talking about growing counties that have taken on large school projects. And so I think the reason they have held their solid ratings, and I know why they've held their solid ratings, is because as long as this county continues to operate in a budget that is a balanced budget, as long as we continue to keep our unassigned fund balance, meaning I'll call it our rainy day, healthy and solid, then I think you are putting in the improvements that clearly, if this board so elects, you elect, the citizens want and expect. So from that perspective, I'm not concerned because, again, I've been able to watch with Kyle and Griffin now how you operate for a number of years, and I just see it operating very well. I mean, you're a well-run county, a desirable county, a growing county, and you are unfortunately feeling those growing pains by virtue of some big projects that have to be sort of absorbed, no different than a variety of these other folks. So, if I wasn't comfortable, as Pat or Charla and March know me for many years, we would not be here today in this forum. We would let you know ahead of time, meaning as a staff, we tell you where we don't think you're going in the right direction if we did.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, and then I'll follow up.
Go ahead.
So what was interesting was having saw this last week, and then one of the gentlemen that was in their two-day conference was the chairman from the Pulaski County. So I took this slide out and I called him in one of our breakouts, and I said, wow, we're getting ready to tackle some big projects. You guys must not have been doing a whole lot of things here lately. And he said, no, we haven't had to build many schools and many large projects. So that, of course, there's a low one at 3.8. But then you look at some of the adjoining counties, Fluvanna with their schools at 11.1. You look at a county we can compare it to quite frequently, at Goochland, they're at 10.9. So again, it's a directional tool. I think it just gives me the ability to look and say how we're going to manage our way through that. I would be curious if you threw out the low at 3.8 and the high at 11 or 15 or whatever terms it could be, what the median would be when you typically sometimes in the business where you throw out the lows and the highs and you may average from there. But
Mr. Chairman, that's the mean. What we're talking about is the median,
Yep.
where 50% is below and above.
Yep.
Yeah.
So,
You're right, Ms. Williams. Thank you.
I would add one more thing, and that is, as you look at this, you know, someone that would look at you, for example, we work with Warren and we work with Pulaski, so know that. They look at this and they say, oh, okay, Powhatan looks pretty good, you know. But everybody has, literally, I don't want to overdo it, but virtually everybody here has other capital projects and other needs. And so, you know, we see this continually changing. I think the point is, yes, we will be at the high end of a range that's still considered by the rating agencies, not by my term. They consider that Moody's actually has categorization, and they consider that a strong level. That's not my term. So from that perspective, maybe that's helpful to you, Mr. Williams, as well. You know, when the national agency, which I will tell you, the interesting thing is when the economy sort of bottomed out about 7, 8 years ago now, the rating agencies got beaten up when they had all these mortgage-backed and that whole corporate world. The irony is, on the municipal side, where we are all involved, they actually did very, very well, and they were quite on target. So the irony is, the rating agencies that care about these things and say these things are actually stronger than ever before, as we'll call it, the intermediaries to the investment markets. They may not be that way on the corporate side, but they are for the municipal side. So we care a lot about that they're going to turn around and say, with their revised policies, mind you, that 15% falls into the strong category from Moody's, which is probably the most respected or one of the most respected agencies or entities. We care about that, so it helps us.
Mr. Chairman? I think what's bothering, not speaking for Mr. Williams and me too, our native conservatism doesn't like the creep from 12 to 15. We just don't like it. Why did we choose 12 to begin with years ago as a target? And because we had high schools to build and Flat Rock Elementary to build and infrastructure, water, sewer to build, et cetera. Why do we set ourselves a target or a limit of 12% when we did that?
I think back then, and I'm going to speculate, but having been involved back then, that range was more of the typical sort of outer limits for highly rated local governments. But now with less and less dollars coming from the federal, less and less dollars coming from the state, more and more unfunded mandates and more pressure, we're seeing 15% as being more realistic. So that's the answer I would say, Mr. Tucker. And a good example is you look at since sort of what happened with regard to EU 911 systems. I mean, those things didn't exist a few years ago in terms of requirements. You're required to do that, as you know, and there's not a single dollar, to my knowledge, that's come from the state or the federal government to do that, just a mandate. So they keep adding the pressure to you and others. So I think from our perspective, the pressures are getting greater, and so we're seeing that yes, it may not feel great, and I understand that totally, the creep from 12% to 15%, but again, our job is to make sure you realize that that's within the range of, on the high end, but in the range of being, you know, still solid.
So you wouldn't consider the move from 12 to 15 just to be an expedience?
No, I think.
You've got real reasons that justifies in your mind doing this without damaging this county's bond rating and reputation?
I would say this, we've seen your bond rating, and we've been a part of your bond rating go from that A range to the solid AA range. Is it possible, if you go to that page, if I could, let's point it out. See what page I had that on. Okay, on page 5. Is it possible, you can see there, you've actually jumped three categories by Standard & Poor's. You've jumped 2 categories by Moody's since the initial rating. Is it possible that taking on, if you do this level of debt, could you move back by 1 notch and still stay in the AA category? That's a possibility. I cannot guarantee you that we'll keep the ratings that we have. We could see, I think at most, a modest move down if we do. But I think at the same time, as long as you do those other things that I mentioned earlier, which is keep a balanced budget, as long as you keep a solid fund balance, as long as you have essential projects and a rationale for them, I think we'll make as strong an argument as we can to keep those ratings, which are very high, and again, we'll see what happens. That's all we can do.
Mr. Chairman, one last question.
Yes.
And this may be for the county administrator. Have we calculated what the total bond borrowing would be if we held to 12%? It would go from 67 to what? Have we calculated that? I'm trying to get a handle on what, if we wanted to hold to 12, how much would we have to cut off the $67 million we're getting ready to consider?
I asked Davenport to calculate several scenarios, but I don't believe I asked for that in Griffin
No,
Mobility.
you did not.
We did not ask for that, but we could do that.
Again, remember, as I said earlier, Mr. Tucker, we have assumed an interest rate that is right now higher than where the market is. Don't know where the market's going to be. If we get your acquiescence over the course of, like I said, the next few weeks, months or 2, we most likely would lock in the majority of the borrowing come basically around June 1st. So we're still looking at, if you think about it, 90 days plus for the interest rates to move. What we could look at and we can run is some cases where if interest rates stay approximately where they are now, what could be the high water mark? If interest rates were to be where we estimated, not estimated, but, from a cautious perspective, we could show that as well. So, won't be one number, it'll be a range.
Might we ask the county administrator to ask Davenport to do that scenario planning for us, just to give us another hunk of data, another touch point?
So what you want is the ratio, would it stay within the 12%? Keep the policy at 12%, what would that be? And then you also, what I would like also is to see, so if the interest rate were, and you'll do some scenarios, is it 1% or higher, or 0.5%, or 0.75%, or 1.5%, what that equates out to with both policies, both a 12% policy and a 15% policy would be both.
And keep in mind as well, depending upon how exactly, and this is where it gets a little more confusing, and I'm sorry, but depending on exactly how we structure that debt, that 15% can come down. Let us go back, and I think what I hear, and we'll do that, and try to put something together that maybe doesn't overly confuse people, but again, it's going to be a little bit of a series, maybe a matrix or something like that. Let's think about that if we could.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Thank you. 2 things. One, this is a workshop, so it's kind of fluid. Did we interrupt a prepared presentation that you were about ready to
No, not at
launch?
all. Oh,
Okay,
no.
fair enough. My question comes right on the heels of Mr. Tucker's, and he couldn't have said it better as far as I'm concerned. When you go from the 12% and you decide to bust through that, if you will, and go up, so we're kind of tickling 15%. When I was looking over these documents in the last couple days, pretty hard, I was uncomfortable. You're helping make me feel more comfortable with the things that you're saying. But I think there's an underlying follow-on question. What happens if we bust through 15%? Because I'll equate it, you using a house example before. I might be able to qualify for a certain amount of house based on my salary. And a lot of people made this mistake 10, 15 years ago, where they went ahead and got as much house as they can afford. And then my car blows up, and then my other car blows up, or whatever, and I've got some more spending to do that's mandatory. Same deal, if we go right up to 15%, now, those graphs that we have are great, but they don't show future new expenditures. To be fair, they do not show future revenue either, so you could play that game. But let's say expenditures wins out, and we go through 15%, and we have that car broken down that we have to pay for, what then? That's kind of my question. That's why I get nervous up there.
Well, and I appreciate that question. Again, that's why it's so critical to have a very solid fund balance, to have an unassigned fund balance that can take care of some unforeseen problems or needs in a given year or for a couple of years. That's number one. Again, I go back to the thought of having a structurally balanced budget. I think the third thing as well is when you look at your overall CIP, you are still using about 20% cash as part of the overall CIP. Now, this may get you uncomfortable, but this is the way rating agencies think, and that is if a real hardship happened and you needed to basically conserve that cash, okay, assuming for some reason you couldn't slow a project down. That's the other point, assuming you could not. Hard to believe, but let's assume you couldn't. Then that cash could be converted to debt service, even for the short period. Not opportune, not desirable, but that's how they think about it, flexibility. But I do think your point is well taken. That's why when Kyle was here last time, and for all those scenarios, we can show you the tax equivalent impact. So we don't sugarcoat it. And I know Kyle would make this point, because I asked him to make this point, and that was, I've been around a long time, as you can tell, I'm fat and balding, so I've been doing this for a while, and you say to yourself, hey, rates, we've seen recessions, especially Northern Virginia, working there. I've seen 30 and 40% drops in assessed value twice in my career. Having said that, tax rates equalized, jumped up quickly, but those things, those counties and local governments didn't fold up. And the point here is, by you recognizing, and ultimately whatever you do is your call, that we will need the equivalent of several additional pennies at some point for any of these scenarios. As long as you recognize that and know that you have to do something, whether that's get some more revenues, cut some expenditures, raise taxes, whatever it is, as long as we've shown you that, that's keeping you at least even from the bad thing that will inevitably happen. Because, let's face it, we assumed a 1% average assessed value growth for 20 years. That's not what we believe is going to happen.
Right.
But that's even by historic standards, and again, maybe we'll have negative interest rates, but we're still having inflation, even through, that's going and is above 2%. We're averaging over 2% a year in inflation. So we're only assuming 1% for assessed value growth, which is half of inflation, natural inflation. So I feel like, 20 years may be quite bumpy, but if we take a look at that over the time of this debt, I think we're going to be okay. As long as you do others, as long as you or your successors do those other things that we've just talked about, if that's helpful.
Very helpful. Thanks for the answer. Appreciate it.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Williams.
I think this is the most recent thing we have from Standard & Poor's. I was sharing it with Rick here. Looking at the rating that they did, and the date on it is September 11th, 2014. So I'm assuming that's the most recent one. I could be wrong.
You think there's a spring for S&P? I don't want to say I don't remember very well, but I'll go with it for the
I think
moment.
we got them on the website, so we can
Yeah,
check.
I don't know exactly.
But anyway,
Yes.
my takeaway is sharing this with Rick. When you read through this is his strong management, very strong budgetary flexibility, strong budgetary performance, very strong liquidity. Then you get to the bottom, it says very weak debt and contingent liability profile. The debt and contingent liability profile is very weak, with net direct debt of 184% of revenue, and with total governmental fund debt service, 15% of total governmental fund expenditures. The county's debt profile improves when considering overall debt, net debt is less than 3% of market value. Amortization of principal is average, with 52% to be retired. Other post-employment benefits, OPEBs, in the form of health insurance. The county contributed $19,000 in fiscal 2013 on a pay-as-you-go basis. As of 2012 valuation, the OPEB plan had an underfunded liability of $931,000. Fiscal 2013, the combined pension and OPEB payments represented a manageable 2% of governmental expenditures. I've heard going forward that we're going to be required to make contributions, annual required contributions for health benefits. Do you know anything about that, and do you have any advice as to how we incorporate that within our funding of the debt?
I would first ask the county administrator to comment.
On the OPEB, the county discontinued its OPEB program, and you only have a few people left in it. You're no longer offering it to any new employees, and you stopped that in December of 14. And so we will actually have, over the years, declining OPEB liability until it's zero, once the existing retirees who have OPEB are no longer receiving it. So that is a declining debt for the county because of the action that the board took effective December of 14 to discontinue that program.
The same is true for the schools.
I can't respond for their
I
schools.
can't either.
I mean, the money has to comes from us. So.
Well, you've been budgeting. I think what they're really saying there, just so everyone knows, I think perhaps you do, we're unique in Virginia because the overwhelming majority of local governments, and this county is one of them, that you have given, and your pensions, whatever percentage that is, it's really guided by VRS. So you have no control over that. And in fact, just anyone might want to ask this question, maybe you already know this answer, but you're not even able to give extra dollars into VRS with the hope that, let's say, it helps your particular county. Doesn't work that way. So there's no advantage for you to give one extra dollar than what they ask for. It just gets averaged to everybody. So I want to point that out. But I think the state has gotten better, and as a result, they've asked the local governments, as you well know, in your budgets, to make sure that certain dollars they want from you, and you're doing that. So it's in your budget.
And also, I just wanted to clarify with Ms. Schubert, and I think she answered me. The OPEB, the GASB OPEB does not require you to fund. It requires you to report the liability. And so you'll see a large number of localities now having to report the OPEB liability, but you're not required to fund it. So.
Pat, you hit around the head. That was my understanding as well. What I'm hearing, though, that will be a requirement going forward for a contribution.
I mean, currently,
Charlie,
what would
you
happen
know.
in the current,
Ms. Schubert, would you please come to the mic? Thank you.
You mean state mandate?
it was based on GASB 68, which was implemented this year, which is required for us to report it on the very first two exhibits of the audit report. So it's reporting the liability, which for the schools is very large because the VRS teacher cost-sharing pool, which again, we don't really have any control over the contributions, how it's invested. They just say, based on what we told you to contribute, this is your portion of the liability. So we're not required to make any additional funding. We're just now required to put the liability on there that VRS says is our liability.
So Charlotte, you haven't heard anything about, like in 2018, that we would be required to start making contributions to the health benefit?
He's talking health, not VRS, so he's
For the
talking OPEB.
The OPEB, I
Yeah.
haven't heard, there is going to be the next GASB standard then requires, I don't believe it's requiring us to add additional contribution. Again, it's going to be a different way of reporting it in the financial statements, the same way as the VRS was added this year.
Okay. Let me switch back to Danmore. Thank you, Charlotte. I asked this question to the auditor last year. I said, well, you know, if the state's doing this to us and we're having to show our portion of the underfunded liability for VRS, would that affect our bond rating? She said, no, because every other locality is, you know, having to do the same thing. And my response at that time, well, it doesn't make me feel good. I'm in the lifeboat with everybody else. Do you have any take on that?
What I do, I'll take one more, I'll add whatever that individual said, and I'll agree with that. But I do think what has happened is the state was told by the rating agencies about 2 years ago when they created the commission that I spoke at one point, that said you need to start kicking it back up because the state took a little holiday. And so that is now being corrected, and you, meaning you, the local governments, are all starting to put in the additional dollars. So the good news from my perspective as your advisor is that that's already been baked into the cake of your budget and budgets. So from that perspective, but I concur, being in the same lifeboat, if it's got a hole in the bottom, doesn't make you feel very good. You're going to go down with everybody else. So. But no, I don't see that happening, though. I don't see that happening. That's not happening.
So, Mr. Rhodes,
Yes, sir.
Mr. Williams read the Standard & Poor comments that were on our website. We did improve our bond rating with Standard & Poor to AA+, with those clarifiers in
Right.
there. That is correct?
That's correct. We did that, if I just add one more thing, there is no doubt, as I said to you, Mr. Tucker, and for everyone, the debt element going forward is our biggest hurdle. But when you demonstrate, as you have, the flexibility, the strong management, your prudence in the other policies, your discussion in terms of how you're going to handle your upcoming budget, and you've done that so well, that's why they're giving all of those comments. And then again, the VRS element, the OPEB, they understand it's just the way the state is, and they're okay. So again, that doesn't mean we don't take a one modest step back, just like we took a modest step forward. But I do think that if we do that, I think it'll be short-lived, meaning it might be a few years. But I think the point is, when I look back, having worked with you for, 20-plus years, we did, relatively speaking, a very large bond issue back in about 1990 or so. I'm going back, I think I wrote it down. What was it? 2001, we did the high school. And if you look at that relative to where the county was some 15, 16 years ago, I don't have the numbers on me right now, but I suspect it was pretty similar to where we are. But you've done other things, so your overall rating has gone up.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'm ready to make a motion if you're ready for a motion.
I don't think we don't need a motion.
We don't need a
Tucker,
motion.
This is
I
a
didn't
presentation.
agree to the draft at this point.
No, I don't think we need to do that.
Then can we agree in principle on the changing the 67 and 71?
Oh, yeah.
And that's simply because I want the public not to feel like we're playing games at the moment.
Absolutely. And it's still, it's got the 71 placeholder, but if we work through the CIP, if we choose to move some things out, then the number could be adjusted based upon, and also, we may change it based upon some of the scenarios they may bring with 12% or different interest rates or those kind of things. Thank you, Mr. Tucker. You guys been quiet. Any questions? Jim?
The only question I had, if you go back to the graphs comparing Powhatan County with the other counties,
Page 9, maybe?
I think it was page 9. And just so I understand this clearly, this is a view of where the other counties and where Powhatan County currently are. Is that correct? And none of the counties in blue, those blue bars reflect CIPs that they're currently discussing. And I'm assuming it's plausible that some of those blue bars are going to grow, similar to the way Powhatan County's is going to grow.
Yes, sir.
And that does make me more comfortable. I do want to compare apples to apples. I don't want to compare where Powhatan County will be to where other counties are. So I just want to understand the graph.
Okay. That was basically what Kyle explained to us last time, was that this is assuming what we're getting ready to undertake. This is just capturing what all those counties currently have, and if they're taking, and speaking with one county this weekend, they're getting ready to tackle a large infrastructure, water and sewer project that they just feel like they have to do for their economic development. And they know that it's gonna change their ratio,
And
it would, you know, that was probably Mr. Norby maybe gonna chime in. The two things were talked about most in these day and a half were the challenges everybody had with creating economic development and the infrastructure investments to do those things. And then the second thing was fire and rescue support, so.
And for those counties undertaking projects of either this magnitude or at least of this magnitude proportionate to their size, 15 is the new 12 for them.
Pretty much.
Okay.
And, Mr. Chairman, I would like to chime in just to help in that discussion. And definitely, economic development was by far the biggest concern, and they also put kind of a flow chart thing up in front of us, and infrastructure improvements came before economic development on that flow chart. You can't have businesses coming in without preparing the way, so to speak. And Jim, to your point, this is a snapshot. These blue bars, some of them may grow quite a bit larger, and some of the large ones may shrink. It depends on where their debt is and, you know, when it falls off, when they take on new debt. So these things can dramatically change.
Yes, sir, absolutely.
And I think Kyle explained this, we're kind of on a 5-year cycle, last meeting, you know, and it seemed to be, every 5 years we seem to tackle something, so.
One final comment. Mr. Roosevelt, I want to personally thank you for the work that you've done for us over many years and the straight talk that you give us, good, bad, indifferent, neutral, answer our questions about trying to pussyfoot around or sugarcoat it. Your staff is very helpful to us, and we really appreciate your work.
Well, the feeling's mutual, thank you.
Mr. Rhodes, I'd second that, but I also, the man sitting behind you, I think the guy's been rolling his sleeves up doing all the work, so let's not forget him.
I get to go to, I get to go back and, you know, see my wife, he gets to go back and see the computer for a few hours. And that's how it works.
Sometimes being young is not quite those advantages. So.
Exactly.
Any other questions or comments?
One comment, Mr. Chairman. I just want to, from a school board perspective, from my individual perspective, I want to thank the county for looking so hard at this and being such good stewards of our dollars. It means a lot to me as a taxpayer and a lot to me as a school board member. And I do appreciate the fact that you've taken a very conservative approach to this scenario and basically projecting a higher than current interest rate and projecting a probably lower than expected growth rate in terms of revenues. So, yeah, like everybody, I'm hesitant and don't want to take on debt, but it's awfully nice to be able to go into it with, you know, the idea that we've kind of hedged against this a little bit by those projections that you've made. And, you know, and we basically are assuming, like you said a minute ago, that if something does go wrong, you know, we don't have any tax increases built in this at all, and I commend the board of supervisors for doing that and laying this out the way you have. Well, I mean, but in the near term, that are tax increases, right?
They kind of back a year.
Right.
Thank you, Mr. Cole.
Right, there's a scenario with no taxes, right?
Move on to 7D. Well, we kind of been having that conversation a little bit at the same time.
That's correct. Under 7B, which is the discussion of the projects, I've heard you say, or I understand you to say, that you'd like us to look at what amount of debt would you be able to issue if you had a 12% ratio. And if you're looking at that discussion and you're looking at the resolution that you may or may not adopt on Monday, I would recommend that you have some kind of discussion tonight about the priorities of your projects. And the reason I say that is, going back to Dr. Jones's budget, he was looking for guidance from the Board of Supervisors. Were they or were they not going to replace a junior high school? Because that decision of the Board of Supervisors impacts his operating budget for FY17. And so I I think staff is looking for some type of guidance if you are going to reduce these, which projects are you considering reducing or cutting? And I don't know if you're prepared to have that type of discussion, but we would like you to be thinking on that. I think we need to know where you're thinking on replacing the junior high.
Can I ask a question? And I think you probably know where I'm gonna go with this. Typically, we have seen the budget in the CIP. This time, we're seeing the CIP and the budget kind of, seeing the CIP a little earlier, and we understand the purpose behind that is to try to make sure we give good, clear direction to the schools on how to build their budget. Could we come prepared to possibly handle the school project on the 22nd and possibly not kick the can down the road, but have a few more weeks or so to have the discussion on the other CIP projects as more data comes in? Would that be something that would bother us as far as with the issuing of the bonds and those kind of things?
I did have that discussion with Mr. Rose and with Mr. Locks, and yes, we could move forward. We could still issue all the bonds together in one bond issue and still have a bond issue this early summer if you make a decision about all the bond projects by the end of March, early April, something like that. So yes, that is possible that you could on Monday have a resolution where you're committing to the replacement of the junior high school and then consider the other bond projects, again, at a later date. And still.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just maybe get some clarification, and I might have to direct this question to Mr. Tucker. I understand what he was asking for, to look at staying, what funds would be available staying at a 12% rate. But I guess, is the question academic, or is it coming prior to a serious discussion of how to trim back the CIP that we've been looking at? If it's academic and if it's there to show how much less money we can get or that we cannot achieve these projects, I understand your motivation for that as well. I just want some clarification, and I don't want us to have discussions that needn't move forward.
It's not academic. I wouldn't waste our time doing an academic exercise. So I guess that backs me into answering the second part of your question. It is possible that I will not vote for the entire $67 or $71 million. Yes, it's possible.
Okay, well, thank you for that clarification.
And I'll go further and say, we're gonna build the middle school, as far as I'm concerned. As far as I'm concerned, as one board member.
Thank you, Mr. Tucker.
If you feel any better.
And the purpose of asking that is not, I don't want to kick the can down the road, but I do think we would need, if we're entertaining that we set a deadline, that we adopt the other CIP projects and move on, so that we can capture as much of this interest rate, low interest rate as possible. I'm on record, and I will repeat it. I said when I was running for re-election that we will build and renovate the middle school. So that's the one project I think that we need to make a decision on, that gives the schools the ability to do what they need to do. And then the other projects, as we move on with those, we can gain a little more clarity on. You know, the water system, placeholder 1.5, is that the project we want to do, or is it going to be a lesser of a project? You know, there's some, as Mr. Norvig mentioned tonight, there's some school leases vehicles and those things. Is that something we want to do? You know, where we're going to push, but I think the one thing that I have been committed to and want to give the schools an answer on is, are we going to do the middle school? And I've said it all along, it's past the point it needs to be done. But, you know, for instance, the 15, it's unfortunate that our E911 doubled, because it did double, as Ms. Waller shared with us, almost double, I guess. And that has some broadband initiatives in there. Is that something as we go forward that we want to capture? And is there a way to pull some money out of that and possibly capture it as we put our RFPs for possible broadband initiatives? So, you know, again, maybe that gives us a couple more weeks, 3 weeks to get some answers and then come back. But the one project that seemed to me that put this in the forefront was the school, giving the schools an answer on the middle school. So, And there are other projects in there that are very time sensitive, you know, the bus garage.
Water system.
The water system, all those things. So, I think maybe we need to capture, prepared very possibly to talk about the two things, the water system and the school, because you can't do the school without the water system. So, that's just a suggestion and a thought process.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
This is actually directed to the other Mr. Chairman. Jim, I actually would like that number for a quote-unquote academic exercise, because I like seeing, you know, like I said last year during the budget process, I like, kind of like artillery, I like seeing one short, one long, and one on target, so I kind of know where I stand. It's not academic in the sense that it's a useless exercise, but it's a helpful exercise to see where am I on the scale. So I actually would like to see it just for that purpose, but also I am considering cuts as well, I'll be honest with you. And they don't have to be draconian, and this leads me in my second one for Dr. Jones. I think it was you that mentioned last time about being able to do things like, and you said, I believe, push school bus leases or vehicle leases forward into the future more. Is that correct? Did I hear something like that correctly?
And we did already do that for the numbers that you see here. So the numbers that you see here are for bus leases in the years 2019 and 20, or maybe it's 20 and 21, are substantially less than what you see in the school board CIP. So we already did push buses out.
Because I guess my point is, it's things like that that I might not think of just looking at the notebook with the CIP. I may not, that may not even occur to me. So I would, Mr. Kunka, wish to investigate other things like that, that maybe, you know, don't hurt the major projects like the middle school, which right now I'm in favor of, always have been. But there might be some other ways to skin that cat, so to speak. I am correct, right, that a penny is now $318,000, penny on the tax rate, 318. So there might be some ways of readjusting the plan slightly so that the taxpayers don't have to carry additional burden, which I'm pretty big on that point right there.
So, this is, Mr. Chairman, at what point are we going to taking the CIP as of the 10th, which is a longer version of it, with each one of the projects listed? Like it's got East Convenience Center, the Man Road Extension, Animal Control Cages, Public Works Projects, Parks and Recreation. Are we gonna have an opportunity to talk as a team about each one of those, seeking out where we might be able to pare back, if indeed we choose to pare back?
It was our understanding that you had that opportunity last week, and if you're asking for another opportunity, of course, we will schedule that. And we would schedule it.
But we have to do it sooner. We have to have that, if indeed we're going to be seeking a 15 to 12 reduction as a possibility, then to your point, not just for the schools, we have to give you direction on priorities.
That's basically
So sooner or later, we've
quality.
got to have this discussion line by line, it seems to me. And if we didn't take advantage of it when you gave it to us before, shame on us. We still have to do it.
And we will schedule another budget workshop specifically for the CIP, and it will be on a Wednesday in March, because you're currently meeting on every Monday in March. And so we will find a Wednesday in March where we will have a CIP workshop.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Williams.
we had talked about, I raised the issue last meeting about our contribution to Cobb's Creek. And I was just telling Mr. Cole, there are things that I don't know that may be coming forward in the budget that's going to affect some of my decisions as it pertains to the CIP and what we can afford, what we can't afford. It would be helpful if we could know and get an update from the county administrator, whether in closed session or whatever, as to where we stand with Cobb's Creek, what will be the likely contribution, because we know from the initial, or the earlier agreement, that beginning in 2020 or 2021, we're gonna be doing annual payments for our pro rata share of 5.1 million or 5.2 million. It's a lot of money. And that affects what? Our ability to make debt payments. So it's those types of things I'm gonna be interested in seeing brought forward in the budget so that I can make decisions about the CIP and what I include and what I can't include. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So there was a question there, what you want to know is, are we going to get that information?
Yes. I think we need.
I think
The
we asked that last
Cobb's
meeting.
Creek will not be in the budget that I'm presenting to you on Monday, because the budget that I present to you on Monday is the FY15 budget, and we have no payments for Cobb Creek's, excuse me, FY17 budget. We have no payments for Cobb's Creek in 17, 18, 19, or 20. And therefore, I will schedule that, as you requested, for a closed session, because we are in negotiations in a contract, and we can have those discussions in a closed session. However, you will not see it again on Monday in the FY17 budget, but you are going to get the complete FY17 budget presentation on Monday, March 22nd, and you have your first, February 22nd, you have your first workshop a week later on Monday, February 29th, and again, you meet every Monday after that, and we will schedule again a Wednesday workshop in March on the CIP. I don't want to add it to a Monday night workshop, they're already very full.
But is it fair to say that as a placeholder, to Mr. Williams's point, wanting to see the long-term costs that we're going to incur, to use the figure $5 million a year starting in 2021?
I will discuss that in closed session. We're in negotiations.
Thank you.
And if I may, Mr. Chairman, just to follow up, because that does fall within the 5-year CIP.
So we do need to, our agenda's posted for the 22nd. We do have a closed session. Can we get that on the 22nd?
Of course you can.
Okay. We'll handle that in a closed session on the 22nd. I'm going to come prepared on the 22nd to make a recommendation to CIP to fund the school, and of course, and wrestle with the water side. I think we need to give them an answer on that, and then all the other CIP projects, we could set a calendar date to roll our sleeves up and talk about animal cages and softball field improvements for facilities and all those other things that are in the CIP at a later date. But I'm going to come prepared on the 22nd to make a recommendation. We let issues that we know that we make a statement of CIP on the schools.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
aren't we required to do the emergency communication system in 2017?
I have that study. I don't know if there's a deadline on it.
I know we had it in there for 2017 to do, or where I'm headed with this thing, I'm getting at those things that we absolutely want to do and required to do.
Great point, and I think we can have those discussions as we go into the additional workshop. Those will be questions that we can get answers to, and we'll know then, as I do my prioritization, as some of the must-haves, whatever terms you want to use.
That's exactly, Mr. Chairman, if I may, or Mr. Williams, and what you just said. It would be very helpful to know, we don't have to take this whole package at one time and solve all these problems all at once. So I would suggest that we look at the things that we call completely necessary, like you just said, and couple it with what Mr. Williams just said. Okay, of the things that are completely necessary, what must we decide on by the 22nd or soon thereafter? And what things, for lack of a better word, can wait a little bit because they're not as time critical as far as starting a construction project or whatever. It would be easier to start paring that out, so I'll take comments on that, but.
I'm sorry, I felt we answered that the most critical one that we needed an answer on by the 22nd, which
Right.
is the middle school.
Right?
And we do need answers on the others by the end of March, early April.
I would prefer.
And we will provide you with enough information as to whether, I think you're asking, is it mandatory by either federal or state law,
That's part of what I'm asking.
correct? And we'll let you know that, or is it a recommendation, or is it potentially mandatory because what you have in place is end of life? We'll give you that information.
Mr. Norby, and I think we're all saying the same thing.
Right.
Your idea of mandatory and my idea of mandatory, maybe two different things, or a must-have, or a
Right.
wannabe, or low-priority project. So I think that's just a dialogue we need to have, and so we have that dialogue. And then we, work to, if we pare down the CIP, then so be it. If we don't, and we're okay with the amount of bonds we're gonna issue, we issue those. But again, I think we should, we owe it to the schools to make the decision in the time-sensitive project that caused this to come before us earlier in our budget. So let's come prepared to have dialogue and a vote on the 22nd for those projects.
I agree, the time-sensitive stuff, that's what I'm trying to identify, so that we don't miss any gates that, and then blow the cost of the thing up because we couldn't make a decision on time. I don't want to do that. I want to make a decision on time for the things that need a decision on time. So I guess what I'm saying is, if there's some other things that we can kind of take a harder look at, I would appreciate the extra time, that's all. And I've been working on it, I've been doing my homework, but
Good.
this is, it's a tough one, it's a tough year.
So Pat, to your point about the middle school, can we going forward put /water?
Yes, sir. We'll bring you forward, you have in your agenda, which went out at 5 o'clock today, the resolution, as you see here. We will bring you another one where it includes just the junior high and the water tower at the lowest amount, 1.5, only the amount that's needed. We'll do that.
Thank you. So Pat, what we need to do is look at our calendar and determine a Wednesday meeting date that gives us the ability to have the dialogue, and then maybe some subsequent thought process before. So we need to do this before April, and be done, so that we don't miss the opportunity to put the two together and then have the bonds issued if for the projects, and give them the ability to make sure they meet their June deadline.
Correct. So I was saying a Wednesday in March.
Okay.
And would you like to set that Wednesday now? Your options are March 3rd, March 10th, March 17th. No, I think I'm reading Thursdays. March 2nd, March 9th, March 16th. Those are your options, because you're already meeting on Wednesday, March 23rd with the school board on the school board's budget.
Pat, take them one by one and let us all give you answers right now. Let's do it.
Okay, let's do it.
Okay.
I'm okay on them all, so I can defer to whatever.
So what was
you
the
want.
first one?
March 2nd.
March 2nd?
Yes.
March,
Suits me.
March 2nd.
Yeah.
Yes.
Larry?
I can do it.
Mr. Williams?
I'm gonna be in Bermuda.
I might want, you may want to, even though you're all available, you may want to give staff more time to compile information.
Okay.
So
Let's do-
March 9th or the 16th, or
Ninth is
any of
fine with
those?
me. Ninth,
Yes.
Angie?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mr. Williams, you'll be back from Bermuda by then?
I'll be fine.
Okay, thank
Okay,
you.
March 9th.
March 9th.
6 PM.
Thank you.
Perfect, thank you.
CIP workshop.
Thank you, Pat.
Very welcome.
All right, at this time, any other discussion on CIP?
No.
Any comments? Okay. We'll move on to their second public comment period. Anyone wishing to speak, please come forward at this time.
Mr. Chairman, and members of both boards, and Dr. Jones and County Administrator. Floyd Green, 2047 Hancock Road. Just wanted, I'm not going to be able to be at your CIP public hearing on Monday night, so next Monday night. So I wanted to go ahead and give you a few items to just keep in mind when you're doing the CIP. First, a real quick overview of our communications system. First communications center in our county was built by the volunteer fire department in the building, and what's now where the Chamber of Commerce is, with used paneling, and created an office on the second floor of that building, which is still there. In 1973 is when it first opened. Communications stayed at that building till the new county administration was built where it is now, and the sheriff's office moved to that location, and communications moved to there. At some point, not long after move there, I ended up taking over the management of the communications equipment and used by the sheriff, fire, and EMS as a volunteer. But nobody else was managing it, so I ended up doing it. So I ended up there, assisted with the move from there to the old jail building, Historical Society building, where we were there inside, upstairs of the second floor of that, which again, you can imagine trying to work a communication center in a building that's got 3-foot thick walls. Was not a fun operation, but we made it work in there. When the courthouse itself was built, and I was the quote-unquote expert, helped with the design of that, and we built the communication center that we currently use there, when we had one dispatcher on duty, and thought, oh my gosh, we're going to have room for 2, if we ever have to, and had an equipment room that was full of equipment. Well, since that time, things have changed, technology has changed. Some things have gotten much bigger, some things have gotten much smaller. We've taken on enhanced 911, all these things that we never had back then. We had, the UPS requirements, all those things that are, and so about in 2005, I put in CIP request to the county saying, in about 5-6 years, we're going to be out of space there. So that would have been about 2010. We're going to be out of space in that place, and you've got to think about what we're going to be doing at that time. As we know, things carried on. It never, it always got pushed further and further back, and we're still in that same space. So again, it's a very, if those that haven't been there, I suggest you go by there, look at it. And again, right now, we're working the space in there with 3 communications officers on the busier shifts on the normal busy times, normal evenings, normal daytimes when court's operation. It doesn't take an account in when there are ice storms, when there are major events. We don't even have any place for even bringing extra staff to even take additional things. So that's, to me, is just a major critical project that you got to continue with as soon as you can, realizing you got to get it in your budget somewhere. Second point I wanted to just say on this is, and I know it's a lot of discussion as to what and where it's going to be, like that. I got personal, serious reservations about trying again to fit it in somewhere else and fit it in someplace, like that. So I really think, and I'm looking forward to the, county staff's looking at this and saying not just, well, we can stick it there, but using a design firm that's going to come out and make, that's experienced with a communication center and, that, and all the things specialty things that it needs, from it out in the fire study recently, for instance, that used that. So again, it's going to be very hard to retrofit any existing building. I think you're going to put a lot of money into place. And so no matter who ends up, backup emergency power to harden to security to all of those different things, a lot of which we in communications. I really think it needs to be thought of from a perspective of, either, and I count the Sallyport as a standalone, but because it's it's being built from the beginning as a communication center. But if not there, some other standalone facility versus trying to cram it in some existing building because, we might have the space there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Anyone else wishing to speak, please come forward at this time. Seeing none, I'll close the second public comment period. This time we'll have county administrator comments, and I am going to allow Dr. Jones, the superintendent of schools, to speak also.
The chairman of the board asked me to respond to the citizen who asked questions directly of me at the February 3rd meeting, and I'm going to respond as requested by the chairman. The citizen's first question was related to the CAFR, and he stated that as he understood, it was delayed 45 days from December 18th, which he called the transmittal date, until February 1st. My response is, December 18th is not the transmittal date. December 18th is the date of the audit report. And the AICPA Statement of Auditing Standards defines specifically which date the auditors must put on their audit report, and it is the date when they have attained sufficient appropriate evidence to support the auditor's opinion. The transmittal date is January 21st, 2016, which is the date that the county received the final CAFR and the reports from Brown Edwards, and we have an email where they were transmitted to us on that date. Staff did not receive the paper copies on that date because, as you read in the email, it states that the auditors would bring us the paper copies when they came to the meeting on January 25th, 2016. If the county had not canceled the January 25th meeting because of the snow, the board would have received the reports on January 25th, which is 4 days after the reports were issued to the county. The board received the reports on February 1st, the day the auditors brought them to the meeting, 11 days after the reports were issued. The second citizen's question was more of a comment. It said, we did not release it maybe because of damaging information that the county administration did not want to release too soon. For example, county's debt exceeding 15% of annual expenditures. And as Ms. Schubert explained to the board, a board member on February 9th, and as Mr. Laux explained a week ago on February 10th, the Government Finance Officers Association, GFOA, requires a different calculation than that used by the bond rating agencies and the county's debt policy. It is my opinion that there is no damaging information in the CAFR. The county received a clean audit opinion, and a draft was submitted to the Virginia Auditor of Public Accounts by November 30th, which is the deadline. And as you all know, if you don't make the deadline, you make the newspapers, such as the City of Richmond and the City of Hopewell. In the report, comments on internal control and other suggestions for your consideration, the auditors have made suggestions for improving our processes, and the county has implemented these suggestions as detailed in the staff's response letters. The citizen asked, why were the Board of Supervisors not given sufficient time to review the audit report so they could ask questions and comments? My response is, county staff distributes documents to the Board of Supervisors at meetings in cases where there is only going to be a presentation, no action. Staff notified the board on January 20th in an email that the reports would not be distributed at the meeting and that it would only be a presentation. This is not unusual. It occurs every year with the proposed budget, which the board will receive for the first time next Monday. It happens every year with the proposed CIP, and actually it occurred on February 3rd in the meeting that we had last week when Davenport distributed the capital funding analysis. It's presented at one meeting. You're given an opportunity to understand the document, hopefully, then take it home, read it, and come back at a later meeting for discussion. And in fact, on the agenda, it's noted as presentations, and we have several examples of when that's happened. The citizen asked, why has no meeting been thus scheduled to review the auditor's findings and recommendations and to ask questions of county staff and auditors as is standard practice? As I understand this review to take place prior to the end of February. That was the citizen's understanding, that the review is to take place prior to the end of February. So staff did not schedule or announce a special meeting because staff added the item to the February 22nd meeting. And as the board already knows, subsequent to that, the February 5th meeting turned out to be, the February 22nd meeting turned out to be a very, very long meeting, and we've broken that up into a workshop, special meeting that starts at 4 and a regular meeting that starts at 6. At the February 1st meeting, when Mr. Williams requested a workshop to discuss this, staff did not commit to a date or a month, so we do not know why the citizens' understanding is prior to the end of February, so I can't comment on his asking me why it's not prior to the end of February. Also, staff schedules meetings to discuss the CAFR if it's requested by the board. We've checked the minutes back to 2011, and the board did not request follow-up meetings for the FY 11, 12, 13, or 14 CAFRs. So we're not sure what standard practice the citizen is referring to in his question. There's a state law that says the auditors must present the CAFR to the governing body by December 31st, and that has been done for the 11, 12, 13, and 14 CAFRs. At the February 1st meeting, Mr. Williams stated we usually get this in November, but we did go back and find that the CAFRs for the past 4 years were distributed and presented in December. And in summary, this item will be discussed again at the March 22nd meeting, February 22nd meeting, and we're going to discuss it at the workshop. We moved 2 of the items from the regular meeting at 6 o'clock to a 4 p.m. special meeting because of time constraints. So it will be on the 4 p.m. special meeting.
Thank you, Ms. Fowler. Dr. Jones, do you have a comment?
I do. Just real quickly, I wanted to express my appreciation to the Board of Supervisors for considering making a commitment on the new middle school sooner than I know many of you would be comfortable doing, given the amount of information that you have to process and the difficult decisions that you have ahead of you. I recognize, as I think the community does, that everything on the CIP is important, and it's all needed, or it wouldn't be on the CIP. But I did want to thank you. It will certainly make our job of potentially closing a school, moving 80 staff members, reassigning students, moving materials ahead of us. It was a Herculean job, and the more time that we have, the better that we'll be able to plan and execute that seamlessly for the community. So I just wanted to again say I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jones. This time we'll move on to item 10, board comment periods. Does any board members have any comments?
I'd like to just respond to Dr. Jones. I said the first meeting, I could understand why you would want to have this information going into your budget season. And if you really want to show your gratitude, bring us a nice budget that's going to be palatable, that we can deal with. You know,
Do my best. Yes, sir.
Any other board comments? I have a couple quick ones. So, Mr. Green, first of all, before I do that, I asked Pat to make that statement tonight because I think it's important we don't answer comments from citizens at a board meeting. So I think it's important that we do go on record to respond to some of the questions that a citizen may have. So that's why I asked Pat to read that tonight. Mr. Green, I will respond. I had a citizen today tell me that the E911 was like having a Volkswagen and having an expanded family. You grew your family from 2 to about 6 or 12, and you're still trying to shove them in a Volkswagen, so I thought that was pretty interesting. And the one thing that stands out to me as I talked to this citizen was the one data point that was in the information. It said 42% of the time was all that an emergency person could get out a signal out of a household. Imagine being that person in a house, but only 42% of the time can you reach and get hold of a communication person. That's pretty alarming to me. So I think the E911 is something that's been passed due. We do need to roll our sleeves up and figure it out. The last thing I'd like to say is that all other localities capture their debt the same way that their auditors are capturing it. So I think it's important, if we want to change something as a board and capture it differently, then we should have dialogue on that. But all of the localities I talked to 4 different county administrators at our conference we were at. They all captured it the same way we were capturing it, in the same way the auditors capture it. Thank you.
Any comments by the school board?
I do, Mr. Chairman, and I just have 2, and I'll make them very brief. I appreciate the Board of Supervisors and the statements that were made tonight about the junior high. I think we all campaigned this fall. The junior high project, the renovations of that building was a significant issue that we were all asked lots of questions about. I think the public spoke very clearly that that was something they felt very strongly about and wanted. And I appreciate the seriousness with which the Board of Supervisors has discussed how that project is funded. That is a different matter than the school board has. I appreciate what you're doing tonight and how you're approaching that issue. Secondly, I just wanted to say that over the past week or week and a half, I've had several folks contact me and express their appreciation to Dr. Jones and his staff for the manner in which they've handled the school closings with the inclement weather over the past few weeks. We've been fortunate to have some snow. I think that they did a very good job in distributing that information and in a variety of ways. I think they've made timely closing decisions, and I appreciate the way that you've done that, and I wanted to thank you in this forum. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Walters. I just had a couple of quick items. Unfortunately, I will not be able to attend the Monday CIP hearing. I'm going to be out of town on business in San Francisco all next week.
We were betting Bermuda.
Almost as good as Bermuda. But I did want to just kind of an open question or a follow-up item. We have a lot of projections and a lot of things in the study that shows the impact of these decisions maybe 3, 4, 5 years down the road. And I wanted to ask the open question. We adjust revenue projections. Can we go back and look at past histories for Powhatan County, maybe not just revenue, but what the value of a penny has been for Powhatan County? Because we already see that for fiscal year 17, it's $318,000, and that's up from $290,000. I'm assuming we can graph that over time, because if you're saying what the impact is going to be 5 years down the road, you know, how can you say 3 cents? 3 cents is not consistent over the years. And if we can find a way to start using Goochland pennies, that'd be great, because a Goochland penny is $430,000. I want people to understand that, you know, when we look at tax rates, if we're going to adjust revenues, if we're going to adjust on one side, we should adjust for the value of what that tax penny is in Powhatan County.
I want to use Loudon pennies.
That'd be great.
The assumption that the Davenport used, the financial advisors used in how much a penny will be in the future is they assumed a 1% growth in real estate assessment. So that's how they did project.
Baked into the penny.
They baked that into the penny, okay?
Thank you.
And they did start at the current rate, not at the 293 penny from last year, so. But we will look and see if we have that information for you on what in the past were pennies, value of a penny.
Thank you.
So any other comments? If not, I'll make a motion to adjourn. Second. Motion to adjourn. All in favor? Aye.
For
Motion
the-
passes 5-0 school board.
And for the school board, motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries 4-0.
Emergency 911 is what they always use.
Comments?